Welcome back to another hardware news recap. For this week, we're talking about more Intel acquisitions of technical press. This time, Kyle Bennett from HardwareCP. That was an unexpected one. AMD and the Radeon RX 560 XT, a new video card launched exclusively in China, which we just came back from. DRAM prices seen the steepest decline since 2011. Some good news there. And then some record shortages of Intel CPUs that are producing unexpected results for 2019. Before that, this video is brought to you by the Massdrop and Hi-Fi Man HE4XX planar magnetic headphones. The HE4XX headphones focus on high-quality audio listening experiences with comfortable foam cushions for the ear cups. Comfort is also ensured with a leather-covered spring steel headband, allowing flexibility and durability against bends. These headphones are capable of delivering big sound for audiophiles while being positioned competitively in price. Learn more at the link in the description below. Quick Gyan news item first. We just restocked our two-tone lightweight hoodies, the ones that are perfect for cooler weather, and we restocked a lot of them this time because you all have a very high demand of those. And we're also doing a special discount code GYANSHILL at checkout. That's GNSHILL. I suspect you all know how to spell the word shill since it's commonly posted in our comment section below. And now we are using that phrasing against you. So if you use GNSHILL at checkout, you'll get 10% off of the lightweight hoodies. And they have the anniversary teardown design on the back. They've got a GN logo on the front, and they're a pretty cool blue and gray two-tone color design. So check those out on store.gamersnexus.net. All right, so first real news item, Kyle Bennett leaving HardwareCP for Intel. This was very unexpected. Kyle very much has always seemed like a ride till you die type, and I think watching this, he will agree with that. But some situations do require a bit more nuance. And in this one, Intel has hired a lot of the technical press over the past year. So this is actually a very important news topic because it shapes the way that technical coverage is brought to the internet, to you all. And it also shapes the way that, in this case, Intel develops its future communications with media or with consumers. So people that Intel has hired recently notably include Ryan Shrout and his team. Most of them, like the entire core team of PC Perspective, has left and gone to Intel. PC Per is still in operation with a new editor-in-chief, but Ken, Allen, and Ryan are all now at Intel, so that is a very notable acquisition. Intel has also acquired talent from AMD's graphics team, including Raja Koduri, the former head of Radeon of the RTG group. That's redundant. And also Chris Hook, who is the marketing lead at AMD for especially RTG. So big acquisitions. Now Kyle Bennett is moving over there, and Kyle's role is a little different from the other ones. Kyle will be focusing, as we understand it, on enthusiast relations and enthusiast sort of, we'll call it outreach, I suppose, for Intel. So it remains to be seen exactly what that means, but in general, it sounds like from Bennett's departing post at HardwareCP that this will be a job largely relegated to communicating with the online enthusiast user base. So could be a good thing to bring a bit of reality back to an otherwise massive company where things kind of get lost in the insane amount of management overhead. So as for what happens to HardwareCP, Bennett has a post on HardwareCP. The website's been in operation for about 2 decades now. It sounds like Bennett will leave it sort of non-functioning or non-updating, but still functioning, still accessible, just not updating, not posting any more reviews of technical products due to the obvious conflict of interest. And then Hard Forum, as we understand it, is being sold off to another company that Bennett trusts, and then all of these properties will be demonetized. So they will exist solely based on, I believe, Patreon donations going forward. So Bennett then hopes to shift internal paradigms at Intel and refocus on the enthusiast desktop user at the company. If you didn't know, Bennett's probably his most recent, I guess, legacy at this point would be the GPP coverage, the GeForce Partner Program that was largely done by HardwareCP. So Kyle Bennett will now be moving on from that type of work and toward Intel. Next news item, DRAM prices are seeing the steepest decline since 2011. Good news for our marketplace. Prices for DRAM are on pace to drop about 30% this quarter alone, even lower than the previously projected 25% drop. So this would now be the steepest decline in a single quarter since 2011. You may recall recall a time around 2016, 2015 area where you could get, at the time, a lot of memory, 8 to 16 gigabytes, for about $50 to $60. And that time hasn't existed back up until now. According to the report by DRAM Exchange, which is our primary source for memory prices, is very accurate and shows often supply side prices too, or at least some of them, vendors are currently sitting on roughly 6 weeks worth of inventory, and due to demand suppression thanks to Intel CPU shortages, another topic for this show, OEMs are unable to sell through that inventory excess. This has led to prices entering a sort of free fall, meaning that the large price reductions are not really going to translate to sales or stimulate demand, largely again because of other shortages in the industry that are outside of memory supplier control. Next up, the Radeon RX 560 XT. This is a card that I don't think it'll be up by the time this news video is up, but we have a video coming up of touring the Shenzhen SEG market in China, wherein I communicated with market vendors and tried to get access to this card before it launched officially because, well, we had seen some rumors online. So we didn't get one before we left China, unfortunately, but this card is a China-only launch, and the 560 XT actually is a bit better in terms of positioning than AMD's previous RX 580, the one that was actually literally an RX 570, but called an RX 580. So you may recall our coverage of the Dataland, which is a toll product, RX 580 in big quotes there, and our determination that it was, again, a 570. This is a bit different. It's not quite as bad, where in that instance, AMD took a product that had an existing spec sheet, renamed it to something else, and then sold it in an extremely misleading fashion under a totally different name with the same specs as a lower tier product while calling it a higher tier product. That was bad. This is actually not that bad. So the RX 560 has 16 CUs for compute units, and which is a container for the SPs or the stream processors. The RX 570 has 32 CUs, and the 560 XT, which obviously sits between the two, has 28 CUs. So it is actually an increase in the compute unit. It is an increase in stream processors, obviously, because they're connected. And so you end up with a product that actually should be a bit better than a 560, while not being as good as a 570, but still allowing a mid-step price point. And this is targeting the China market or the Asia Pacific market, and that's a bit different market demand than in the West. So this may have a good sell-through rate over there. We're not sure yet. We'll try and get one though. So anyway, new card from AMD. Keep an eye out for it. It's called the 560 XT, and we'll see on the prices as it sees wider spread posting on retail sites. Intel record CPU shortages. Not expected to get any better through second quarter of 2019, and this is related loosely to that memory story as well. So Intel is affecting the whole market at this point, and that's a lot of pressure to be Intel, where if you do poorly, everybody else except AMD does poorly. The motherboard vendors are having the same issue where their sales, Gigabyte and Asus especially, and notably, are down as a result of down processor sales from Intel, despite AMD's climb. So Intel's record shortages of 14 nanometer CPUs are well documented. We've been documenting them for probably a year now. And according to Industry Profits Digitimes, those shortages look like they may be compounded next quarter. And this is not just conjecture, it's not just rumors, this is probably going to be accurate. So just in time for peak Chromebook season, Intel will be, again, at a bigger deficit for 14 nanometer than previously. According to the report, quote, Digitimes Research expects Intel's CPU's supply gap to shrink to 2 to 3% in the first quarter, with Core i3 taking over Core i5 as the series hit hardest by the shortages. And further, in that report, which we encourage you to read, we'll link it in our show notes below, Digitimes noted that currently the Coffee Lake Core i5 CPUs are the hardest to get a hold of. Now, fortunately for desktop users, this isn't a big deal because the i5s have largely been usurped by the R5s at this point, but there's still a large audience for that, and it's shrinking presently because there's no supply. So the supply constraint will shift to the Core i3 models, especially in the second quarter of 2019, as Chromebook demand should be kicking off. bad timing there. Intel's inability to deliver on-record demand has led to AMD historically encroaching on Intel's notebook market share, with AMD's market share going from 9.8% in first quarter 2018 to 15.8% in first quarter of 2019, year over year, a significant increase. Additionally, vendors are expected to ship the first ever AMD-based Chromebooks next quarter, leading AMD to an anticipated 18% market share in the second quarter of 2019. And we'll have more news on the topic of market share coming up this week. We have some sort of Gyan exclusive content we're working on for you. If you're curious about that stuff, make sure you subscribe. But Intel's expected to bring more 14 nanometer productions online soon. Intel has been shifting its product lines around. It has done some interesting and sort of strategically, I guess, risky moves of shifting some of its chipset production back to older process nodes like 22 nanometer and using those for the really low-end modern chipsets. So by the second half of 2019, Intel is expecting to increase its production capacity by 25% of 14 nanometer, which would reverse some of the shortage problems it has now. And Intel's also previously announced several expansions at key sites. We've talked about multi-billion-dollar investments in Israel and in other sites like in Oregon and Ireland. So Intel's bringing all of these fabrication plants up to speed for 10 nanometer, 14 nanometer, or whatever the future may hold. So Intel's 10 nanometer Ice Lake is scheduled to volume production in the second half of 2019, but according to those Digitimes reports, there are still several problems with the 10 nanometer process. As such, it looks like Intel could delay that 10 nanometer further. We'll see where it lands. Originally, we were expecting kind of third quarter, something in that range, end of summer, third quarter for 10 nanometer, but it's hard to say if that's going to be hit at this point. That was our estimation in December, back when we were at the Intel event, the architecture day for 10 nanometer, but things have changed since then. So we'll see what happens. 7 nanometer, of course, is up for discussion as well. Despite all of this, though, despite all of Intel's production woes, it's still on track to dethrone Samsung and retake the crown as the world's top semiconductor supplier for 2019. So in spite of all that, Intel's at least looking a little better. Intel previously held that title from '93 until 2016, when Samsung famously usurped Intel as the world's leading chip vendor at the peak of the memory boom, which has now waned and subsided, leaving Samsung with 20% lower sales this year and giving Intel the ability to retake that title. Despite Intel's sales predicted to remain flat at this point, it looks like they will be taking that title back. New York has not yet given Charter Communications the boot. So we've talked about this before as well. Last year, the New York government historically ejected Charter Communications, which operates the world's best internet service provider, Spectrum, that nobody hates at all. And they moved to eject Spectrum and Charter from the state and banned them from further business dealings, marking an unprecedented move against ISPs. However, to date, New York hasn't followed through on that promise to boot Charter and has allowed them to remain operating. So New York's approval of Charter's merger with Time Warner Cable was contingent on several factors, and factors that, according to the state of New York, were never met. This prompted New York state officials to revoke their merger approval, ban Charter Communications from the state, and demand a 60-day transition plan to be filed. Although the plan hasn't been filed, as Charter Communications has been granted several extensions while it renegotiates with the state. Currently, the State Public Service Commission recently granted Charter another deadline extension with a new deadline of May 3rd, 2019. Charter's repeated extensions are reportedly based on it working toward a settlement with the state, one that may presumably allow them to remain operating in New York. According to the New York PSC, the most recent deadline extension was granted based on a few conditions. Quote, department staff had previously advised that any final settlement will include, 1, an agreement on eligible passings, i.e. home and business addresses, that will count toward the 145,000 passing build-out conditions pursuant to the 2016 merger order. 2, a penalty and or an arrangement pursuant to which Charter funds the expansion of broadband access to further customers, in addition to those passed pursuant to the build-out condition, and 3, an enforceable schedule to complete the remaining build-out work. And there are several posts by the New York Attorney General, I believe, or on some New York official government legal sites we've posted in the past. And then Ars Technica covered this most recently with a full write-up, if you're curious for more on that, or if you live in New York and you want to know what's going on. NVIDIA beats Intel in a bidding war for Mellanox. This is a bit older news, but we were in China when it happened. So recently, both NVIDIA and Intel were fighting to bid for the company Mellanox, which is an Israeli startup focused on networking hardware using Ethernet and InfiniBand protocols for data centers and cloud computing. Intel had offered $6 billion, but NVIDIA asserted that it could offer up to 10% more for the purchase. Also, NVIDIA was likely more favored for the purchase, as Intel could potentially run afoul of regulators. Intel already has a sizable share of the InfiniBand market through its TrueScale fabric products, and that's part of the concern there. NVIDIA eventually confirmed a $6.9 billion acquisition of Mellanox on Monday, March 11th, and both companies subsequently issued statements. Quote, the emergence of AI and data science, as well as billions of simultaneous computer users, is fueling skyrocketing demand on the world's data centers. And that was Jensen Huang of NVIDIA, the CEO, who further stated that addressing this demand will require holistic architectures that connect vast numbers of fast computing nodes over intelligent networking fabrics to form a giant data center scale compute engine. You get the idea. It's filled with a lot of CEO words, but you get the idea. So anyway, it's a play at AI and data science, something NVIDIA has been doing for a while now, and looking at things like high performance data center computing, looking forward to the future of autonomous vehicles, things like that. Next up, the sun is setting on Skylake. As Intel announces end of life, the processors were announced in 2015. They included the 6700K and 6600K and are now being put to rest, joining EOL status with a bunch of other older Intel parts. OEMs and retailers have until September 27th, 2019 to place final orders. The last chips will ship March 6th, 2020. Won't really affect anyone in our audience. I honestly didn't know they were still making any. Then we have one more story here. Hackers exploiting the recent WinRAR vulnerability. You may have seen in our previous hardware news episode that there's a, I don't know, it's like a 19-year-old vulnerability in WinRAR that could be exploited through a third-party library. That was patched out in the most recent version of WinRAR, but it's being exploited now. So, as fate would have it, days after being disclosed by the cyber research firm Checkpoint, the attack vector began to be exploited in WinRAR. WinRAR's estimated 500 million users, many of whom likely don't know about the vulnerability or the patch, will now have an ideal attack surface for opportunistic hackers. So McAfee, the one run by the crazy guy previously, has identified over, quote, 100 unique exploits and counting, with most of the initial targets residing in the United States at the time of writing. Additionally, 360 Threat Intelligence Center has documented several ways that attackers are using the exploit to spread malware, and they've posted that via Twitter. So one such way that's gained traction is through a booby-trapped file named Ariana Grande Thank You Next 2019 320.rar, meant to entice those looking at bootleg Thank You Next albums. So it's imperative that if you're a WinRAR user, at this point, you update to version 5.7. You don't download weird things that sound like viruses. And if you happen to be an Ariana, is that even how you say her name? Grande fan, more of a metal person, I don't know, then be careful of the album. Maybe buy it instead, I don't know. So that's it for this one. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more. As always, you can go to store.gamersnexus.net to use that Gyan shill code if you want to get 10% off of the lightweight hoodie. I'll see you all next time.